So this is just going to be a tutorial on how to make a proper bloom effect in Godot, because it's something that I always want to do, but I couldn't really find any good comprehensive tutorials on it, so I thought I'd just make a quick video about it. But basically you want to go into project settings, rendering viewport, and then enable HDR2D, which basically unlocks an intensity value for all of your colors. So on every node's modulate, you'll be able to up the intensity of the color, which will in the end result come across as bloom. And this works on like all nodes, node 2Ds, control nodes, anything that is visually rendered on the screen, because of the way that Godot works. Although I realized that to do this effect, we need some art to begin with. So I'll just quickly speedrun making some random pixel art that we can use to demo an effect. And just one thing to note when you're making your sprites or art is that you want anything with an emissive property to be on a different layer, so then you can control its bloom separately. So in this case, I made the eyes red and I want the eyes to be glowy, so I export them as a different layer. And then we're making a torch, so the same thing, I'll make the base of the torch a separate layer to the flame of the torch, and then that allows you to just apply the glow to the flame of the torch. So now in your Node 2D scene, we just want to add the sprites. You can do this however you want to for your game, but I'm just going to create a Node 2D parent, which will hold the two sprites for the different parts. So one for the base of the character and one for the eyes. And then they're on separate layers, or they're separate sprite 2D objects, which means that we can basically modulate them individually. And because the default background color is, I think, a boring shade of grey, we can make it a bit more moody by just bringing it down a little bit, making it a bit darker, which will help the highlights stand out when we turn on the bloom. So then the next part is to actually set up the bloom, and to get a bloom you basically need a world environment. You need to set the mode to canvas, and this is important to allow the bloom to function for whatever reason. And then you need to enable glow, but first I'm just going to change the tone mapping, because Aces I find generally looks nice. It's sort of an industry standard, although it does make colors darker, so we'll lighten up the background color slightly again, but then we can enable glow. And now when we go into our color property under visibility, then we can basically up this intensity slider, which is what the HDR2D unlocks for us. And now you can start to see the eyes are glowing on the character. Because it's a pixel art game, the rendering in the viewport won't look quite the same as the actual game. So you can see when you zoom in, it sort of changes how much, like how far out the glow is coming. But when you actually run the game, it'll be sort of more consistent. And then I'm realizing I had to change some other settings. So because it's pixel art, again, we want to make sure that the viewport expands to fill the window. So we'll go and change it to that mode. And then when we run the game, we can see we've got our nice little glow on the eyes of the character. So now I'm just going to make the torch, and I'm just going to duplicate the character and then just edit the sprites. So we can put the torch sprite into the first one, and we can put the flame into the second. And because we had the glow applied already to the eyes, then it automatically gets applied to the flame. And I mean, that's basically it. That's how you get a nice looking glow in Godot. So it's really important that you use the HDR colors, because I've tried this without HDR colors and it is a lot harder to control, because you have to basically set a threshold somewhere and then everything's glowing no matter what. So HDR colors are really good for having really tight control over what glows and what doesn't. So there's a little guy with a torch that's glowing. So like the next thing you probably think to do is basically automate the glow. So you want it to like come in and out, or you want it to pulse or something. So this is where you'll need a script, but it's sort of relatively straightforward because all we need to do is change the color of the modulate property of the sprite 2Ds. So I'm just going to start off with a frequency because we want to define how fast it's pulsing, and then an intensity because we want to say how much it's going to glow. And then I'm just going to write it all in ready, which obviously you wouldn't do in a final game, but it works just for this example. So we're going to use a tween. So to set up the tween, we just say create tween. And then we want to modulate the property, or tween the property, I should say. Now we want to apply this effect to the modulate property of the sprite the script is attached to. And we need to make sure to reference self, which is the object, and then modulate, which is the property. And then I'll just speed through this bit where I forget how to loop a tween, because we basically just want this to loop forever. So I'll just go to the documentation and check how you loop a tween, because that's the best place to check. And so here it is. If you just enter no parameters into the set loops function, then it'll just loop infinitely unless it gets killed. So we'll just apply that when we create the tween. And now we can actually set up the parameters of the tweens. So we want it to go basically from intense white to plain white. So it's pretty simple. You just take the color white and then you multiply it by the intensity value. And then we input the frequency into the duration parameter of the tween. So then it sets the speed. So then when we run it, fingers crossed, nothing happens because somehow the script got detached. So we'll attach the script again, and now it is working, but it looks a little bit fast. So we can mess around with the frequency, and then I realized that I did the calculation wrong, and it's 2 divided by frequency, not frequency divided by 2. So that's an easy fix. And that's basically the simplest way you can animate bloom or glow effects in Godot. So if you want to sort of fine tune the glow effects, you can just go into this world environment and just mess around with the parameters. And you can do this while the game's running, so then you get instant feedback on what you're changing. And yeah, you can really make it quite a lot. So yeah, this is probably a useful step for refining how your game looks. So like I mentioned at the start, this basically applies to all nodes. So even particle effects it'll apply to, and that's just basically the way that Godot works. It's sort of built to apply to everything in the engine, which is why when you turn on HDR 2D, it actually makes the editor look slightly different. So if we create a simple particle system, I might just speed through this. It's not particularly unique or interesting. There's plenty of tutorials on how to make cool looking particle systems. But then basically at the end, if we go into its visibility modulate property, we can add HDR colors to that. And then it makes these nice glowing particles coming out of the flame. So yeah, that's basically it for the bloom tutorial. I hope you learned something. Thanks.